Good evening, volunteers with Citizens Climate Lobby and everyone else gathered here tonight. I want to report on three things: the bad news, our next step forward, and then the good news. First, let me share the background information. In December 2015 in Paris, 196 nations agreed to limit global warming to 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels. This goal was based upon the broad understanding that exceeding 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit would result in nasty consequences, such as sea level rise, food shortages, worsening storms, and extreme heat waves likely to outpace our civilization's ability to adapt. President Obama went to Paris promising the United States would reduce carbon emissions up to 28% by the year 2025. He confidently made that pledge because of a new environmental regulation, or EPA, known as the Clean Power Plan. It aims to reduce carbon dioxide emissions at new and existing power plants. A strong commitment from the United States was essential to getting other nations to make pledges of their own. Now, the bad news. February 9th of 2016, the Supreme Court voted in a 5-4 ruling to delay the implementation of the Clean Power Plan until legal challenges are resolved. How disastrous was the Supreme Court ruling? It's worse than you think. What basically it is the court's decision now raises uncertainty. The U.S. Paris climate commitment was based upon President Obama's executive action. Unfortunately, it is now facing aggressive challenges in U.S. courts. The Supreme Court stay raises international doubts if the United States can now meet its obligations. People worldwide now worry if this regulation will eventually be upheld. So with this disappointing Supreme Court action, that leads me to my second point, which is our legislation is the best step forward. So what is the meaning of that ruling for us today? First of all, the Supreme Court stayed. It did not overrule the Clean Power Plan. It's a temporary stay or hold. It means that this law cannot be implemented until all legal challenges are resolved. And it highlights the weakness of addressing climate change through executive action, because the Supreme Court could not down this executive action. And even if the court upholds the plan, a future U.S. president could cancel it. The best and most permanent solution is congressional action, which will last across presidencies. This underscores the importance of our work. For Congress to pass our proposal, it is a market-based approach that is favored by both economists on both the left and the right. Citizens Climate Lobby recommends a policy known as carbon fee and dividend. This fee starts at $15 a ton of fossil carbon dioxide emitted. It is placed at the source, the coal mines, oil wells, or the U.S. border. It increases each year by $10, so that within a decade, clean energy is cheaper than fossil fuels. All of the money that is collected is returned to American households on an equal basis. And under this plan, all of the households would two-thirds, 66% of the households would break even or receive more in their dividend check than they would pay for the increased cost of energy. And a predictably increasing carbon price signal would send a clear market signal to entrepreneurs and investors to go all in, to invest fully in the clean energy economy. So this is a market-based solution. It's not government regulations. So in 2014, a study by the Regional Economic Models Incorporated, REMI, found that our policy would, within 20 years, reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 52%. It would also create about 2.8 million jobs for the U.S. economy. And even better, by the end of that 20 years, the dividend checks would increase household incomes up to $400 a month or $4,800 a year, which would more than cover the increased cost of fuel. Sounds great, you may be thinking, but what are the chances that this dysfunctional and partisan Congress will take bipartisan action to address climate change? Well, actually, there is more hope than you think. And that leads to my third point, which is the good news, the progress that's happening already with Congress. In September of 2015, Republican Representative Chris Gibson of New York introduced House Resolution 424. This resolution states that climate change could have negative impact on our nation and Congress should start working on solutions. It is now co-sponsored by 12 other Republicans. A second breakthrough happened in February, the formation of the bipartisan House Climate Solutions Caucus. It is co-chaired by Florida Representative Carlos Cabello, Republican, and Democrat Ted Deutsch, who is also from Florida. So with the bad news and the good news, here is our take-home message for you today. The Supreme Court's decision to delay the Clean Power Plan exposes the folly of relying upon executive action to solve the most critical problem facing our civilization. As more Republicans express a willingness to come to the table, Congress must pass our carbon fee and dividend solution proposal. Our solution can bridge the partisan divide. At this point, I will now take questions from the audience for the next 5 minutes. So, timekeeper, can you reset the clock there? Aaron, do you have a question for me?
So, Brian, how do you foresee the dividend program continuing when, over time, you project that fossil fuels will be used less and less? As a result, I foresee that there would be less and less money to return to households, and eventually they would be able to sustain the increased cost of fuels instead of the dividend program persist with.
Well, according to the REMI study, the dividend keeps going up. There too. Are you talking about at the end of 20 years or at the?
I'm just saying, if our goal is to move away from fossil fuels, as we use less and less fossil fuels, there's less and less money being paid in a carbon tax to be given out in a dividend.
That's a great question, but what my understanding from the REMI report is they're showing over the next 20 years it would keep increasing. So as the cost would go up, it would more than cover that. There too, but I can always get back to you on that.
Yeah, because eventually it sounds like if we're not using.
Yeah, but that is the goal, that we don't use carbon dioxide. So that at that point we win, and the economy has shifted over to 100% clean energy.
I'm just not sure how those households then are going to balance the competing cost of increased energy loads.
Well, what happens is they're going to be using less and less too. They're going to be using less and less fossil fuels. So they'll be losing less.
Other energy that they have to pay for.
Would it be covered under the fee though, under the dividend? If that makes sense.
The fee eventually will go away because the individuals.
But by the time the fee goes away, then we'll be switched to the clean energy economy, if that makes
I
sense.
think Aaron's saying the dividend would then be diminished and then energy gets expensive.
I don't think so, because the thing is, anything you start from the beginning, the cost of the energy is going to be more. And the clean air energy is going to be, working on the long run, they will make the improvement for clean energy cheaper.
Jim, did you have a question for me?
Mr. Ettling,
Yes.
thank you for the tremendous demonstration and talk. I have a question. I understood as you clearly said that this is a market-driven solution and
Yes.
not government regulation.
Yes.
Well, my interpretation is that it is not market-driven, it's not free enterprise. Corporations aren't going to freely volunteer to do this. It will only happen with rigid, major governmental controls. Can you please explain that?
That's a great question, because already ExxonMobil, Walmart, BP, they're already doing their own internal carbon tax. They anticipate that we're eventually going to get a carbon tax. And keep in mind that 50% of global emissions for countries worldwide, they are now doing either a carbon tax or cap and trade. So it's happening more and more on a global scale here too. So more and more businesses are saying we should have a carbon tax, and countries throughout Europe are doing it. China actually has 7 provinces with cap and trade. And this year they're supposed to implement a nationwide program. So there's actually a global movement towards it, and there's actually lots of companies that are saying that we should have a carbon tax.
But for it to, and as you explained,
Yes.
worldwide or even the United States, wouldn't it not need major governmental regulation?
It does not. It's the simplest plan you can come up with. Are you familiar with former Secretary of State George Shultz?
Yes.
So he's actually looked over a plan. He's actually on the board of directors for Citizens Climate Lobby. And he says it's the simplest, most transparent, and the most easiest to administer. Because basically you collect the fee at the source, at the coal mine, oil well, or at the border, and then you return that revenue. It's strictly passing through the government. You do not have to increase any regulations with that. It's a much more efficient plan than the clean energy plan that President Obama's did. President Obama's plan only does reduces emissions 30% over 20 years. This actually does it over 50%. So it's much more efficient, and it basically uses the market to do that. Any other questions here right now? Kathy?
Well, this isn't really a question, but just to address some of what people are saying. You know, if you owned a restaurant and you dumped your garbage in the street, you know, you would not be allowed to do that. You know, that's supposed to be factored into your cost of doing business, that you pay somebody to collect your garbage. And yet we're letting these companies dump what this is garbage that's going to poison our planet, that's going to destroy this civilization and the human race. We're letting them dump their garbage into the atmosphere and poison all of us. They should, you know, they should not be allowed to do that any more than you or I should be allowed to open a restaurant and just dump our garbage in the street. And as far as the costs going up for households, solar, look at what's happening in California. The cost of solar, the sun is free. The cost of solar is going to come down. It would, and it's already coming down. If they are subsidizing fossil fuels to the tune of billions of dollars, of our tax dollars.
Yeah, unfortunately, Kathy, I have to wrap up here, but I really appreciate this opportunity to address it here tonight, what's the latest what's happening with carbon fee and dividend, and hopefully we can continue the conversation going later on this evening in the future. But thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you guys here tonight.